I walked into Desert Rose Cafe, expecting to surprise my husband with lunch during his important client meeting, but instead found him feeding strawberries to a woman who definitely wasn't discussing quarterly projections. 6 months later, that same woman was writing me a check for $50,000 and calling me her business partner while my ex-husband delivered our coffee orders. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting rich. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly through the windshield of my aging Honda Civic as I sat in the parking lot of Desert Rose Cafe, watching my world crumble through floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside the trendy Scottsdale establishment, my husband Kevin was leaning across a corner table, his fingers gently brushing a strawberry against the lips of a stunning woman with glossy black hair. This wasn't the professional handshake and portfolio presentation I'd expected to witness during his supposed client meeting with Rachel Chen from Desert Bloom Interiors. This was intimacy in broad daylight, complete with shared desserts and the kind of lingering eye contact that belonged in bedroom scenes, not business conferences. My hands trembled against the steering wheel as I processed what I was seeing. Kevin had asked me to bring him lunch because his meeting was running long and he'd forgotten to eat breakfast in his rush to impress this potential client. I'd actually felt proud of him for finally taking his consulting business seriously after months of what seemed like false starts and canceled appointments. I'd even stopped at his favorite deli, spending money we didn't really have on the expensive pastrami sandwich he loved, thinking it might bring him luck in landing what he'd described as his biggest client opportunity yet. The woman Rachel threw back her head in laughter at something Kevin said, her manicured hand resting possessively on his forearm. She was everything I wasn't in that moment. Polished, confident, wearing what looked like designer clothing that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her jewelry caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and even from the parking lot, I could see the way she commanded attention simply by existing in space. Kevin was mesmerized, leaning into her personal space like a moth drawn to flame, completely oblivious to the world around them. I recognized her immediately from the business card Kevin had shown me weeks ago, explaining how this interior designer needed help with digital marketing for her expanding firm. He'd spoken about her with what I'd depicted as professional enthusiasm, describing her innovative approach to Southwestern design aesthetics, and her impressive client roster that included several high-end resorts and celebrity homes in the area. Now I understood that his enthusiasm had been of an entirely different nature. The lunch bag containing his pastrami sandwich sat heavy in my lap, suddenly seeming ridiculous and pathetic. Here I was, playing the supportive wife, bringing sustenance to help fuel his important business meeting, while he was clearly being sustained by something else entirely. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd driven across town during my lunch break from the medical office where I worked, rushing to support what I now realized was an elaborate deception. My phone buzzed with a text message from my sister Nicole asking how Emma's art show preparations were going. The reminder hit me like a physical blow. Tonight was our 8-year-old daughter's end-of-year art exhibition at Sunrise Elementary, an event Emma had been excitedly preparing for over the past month. Kevin had promised to leave work early to help set up her display, assuring both Emma and me that nothing would interfere with this milestone moment. Yet here he was, feeding strawberries to another woman while our daughter waited for him to keep yet another promise that was apparently already broken. I thought about Emma that morning, carefully packing her art portfolio with the watercolor paintings she'd worked on all semester. Her face had glowed with pride as she showed me each piece, explaining the techniques her teacher had taught her and pointing out the improvements she'd made since the beginning of the year. She'd specifically asked if Daddy would be there to see her favorite painting, the one depicting our small family standing in front of our apartment building with exaggerated smiles and rainbow-colored sky. I'd assured her that of course he would be there, that nothing was more important to him than celebrating her achievements. The memory of Emma's trusting expression made my chest tighten with a mixture of rage and protective maternal instinct. Kevin's betrayal of our marriage was devastating enough, but his casual disregard for our daughter's important moments felt like an unforgivable cruelty. This wasn't the first time he'd prioritized his own desires over Emma's needs, but watching him lavish attention on another woman while our child waited for him to honor his commitments crystallized something cold and determined within me. I remained in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, documenting their interaction with my phone's camera. Not because I planned to use the footage immediately, but because some instinct told me I might need evidence later. Kevin and Rachel seemed completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world around them. They ordered wine despite it being barely past noon, sharing plates, and feeding each other bites of food with the comfortable familiarity of people who'd done this many times before. The longer I watched, the more details I noticed that should have been obvious warning signs. Kevin was wearing the blue dress shirt I'd ironed for him that morning, the one he claimed was necessary to make a good impression on this important potential client. But he'd paired it with the expensive watch I'd never seen before, and his hair was styled with more care than he typically devoted to his appearance. Even his posture was different, more confident and animated than he'd been at home in months. Rachel kept touching him throughout their conversation, small gestures that spoke of established intimacy rather than new professional acquaintance. Her hand would rest on his shoulder when she laughed, or she'd lean forward to whisper something that would make him grin like a teenager. These weren't the interactions of two people discussing marketing strategies and target demographics. These were the movements of lovers comfortable in their secret world. When Kevin finally kissed her goodbye, a soft, lingering kiss that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt was there, sharp and immediate, but underneath it was a growing sense of clarity that surprised me with its intensity. I wasn't just angry about the affair itself, though that betrayal cut deeply. I was furious about the elaborate lies, the wasted money on expensive lunches and new clothes, the broken promises to Emma, and the months of financial stress I'd endured believing Kevin was genuinely trying to build a business while he was actually pursuing a different kind of partnership entirely. As I drove away from Desert Rose Cafe, Kevin's untouched lunch still sitting beside me, I began to form the outline of a plan that would address all of these betrayals simultaneously. If Kevin wanted to play business games with Rachel Chen, perhaps it was time for me to learn the rules of that particular game myself. After all, I reasoned, if she was successful enough to afford designer clothes and expensive lunches, maybe there were legitimate business opportunities worth exploring. The afternoon passed in a strange haze of forced normalcy. I returned to work at Dr. Morrison's office, processed patient files, scheduled appointments, and handled insurance claims while my mind churned with possibilities. My colleagues noticed my distraction, but I attributed it to pre-event nerves about Emma's art show. Miss Peterson, the office manager, even offered to let me leave early to help with preparations, an offer I accepted gratefully. I picked Emma up from after-school care at 5:30, listening to her excited chatter about the art show setup, while mentally calculating how I would handle the evening without Kevin's promised assistance. Emma had been counting on both parents being there to help arrange her display and introduce us to her art teacher, Ms. Rodriguez. The thought of disappointing her or making excuses for Kevin's absence made my resolve strengthen further. Emma's art classroom was already bustling with activity when we arrived. Other families were setting up displays, hanging paintings and arranging folding chairs for the evening presentation. Emma immediately rushed to claim her designated wall space, carefully unpacking her portfolio while I surveyed the scene and tried to figure out how to manage the setup alone. That's when Kevin finally appeared, hurrying through the classroom door with wind-blown hair and the slightly guilty expression I'd learned to recognize over the years. He was carrying a bouquet of flowers that looked suspiciously like a last-minute grocery store purchase, and his shirt had a small stain that definitely hadn't been there that morning. Emma launched herself at him with pure joy, wrapping her arms around his waist while he bent down to hug her back. For a moment, watching their reunion, I almost convinced myself that I'd misinterpreted what I'd seen at the cafe. Kevin did love Emma, genuinely and deeply. His affection for our daughter was one of the few aspects of his character I'd never questioned. But love and reliability were different things, and Emma deserved both from her father. Kevin helped Emma hang her paintings with appropriate enthusiasm, praising each piece and asking detailed questions about her artistic process. To an outside observer, he probably looked like an engaged, supportive parent. Only I knew that he'd arrived 40 minutes late, leaving me to handle the initial setup while he'd been saying goodbye to Rachel Chen after their extended lunch date. During the presentation portion of the evening, as Ms. Rodriguez spoke about each student's artistic growth throughout the year, I found myself studying Kevin's profile and wondering how long the affair had been going on. His excitement about his digital marketing business had started around the same time he'd mentioned meeting Rachel, roughly 3 months ago. Had their professional relationship been a cover story from the beginning, or had it evolved into something personal over time? The questions multiplied as I considered the financial implications of Kevin's deception. If he wasn't actually working on legitimate consulting projects, where was the money coming from for his new clothes, expensive lunches, and the general air of prosperity he'd been projecting lately? We'd been struggling to make ends meet for months, with me working extra shifts at the medical office and picking up weekend filing jobs to cover our basic expenses. Yet Kevin had somehow found funds for what appeared to be an elaborate courtship of another woman. After the art show ended and we'd carefully packed Emma's paintings back into her portfolio, Kevin suggested stopping for ice cream to celebrate her successful exhibition. Emma was thrilled by the idea, and I agreed despite my emotional turmoil, because seeing her happy felt more important than processing my own complicated feelings in that moment. At the ice cream shop, watching Emma excitedly describe her favorite paintings to Kevin while he listened with genuine attention, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our entire family. I wouldn't confront Kevin immediately about the affair. Instead, I would use the time to gather more information about Rachel Chen, her business, and exactly what kind of opportunities might exist in the interior design world that Kevin had stumbled into. If Rachel was successful enough to afford expensive lunches and designer clothing, her business was clearly thriving. If Kevin had managed to gain her attention and trust, despite his limited professional credentials, perhaps there were aspects of her operation that could benefit from legitimate business partnership. And if Kevin thought he could deceive me while building relationships in the design industry, he was about to discover that two could play that particular game. That night, after putting Emma to bed and listening to Kevin's elaborate explanation of his delayed arrival at the art show, something about unexpected client calls and traffic delays, I began researching Desert Bloom interiors online. Rachel Chen's website was impressive, showcasing a portfolio of high-end residential and commercial projects throughout the Phoenix area. Her client testimonials praised not just her design aesthetic, but her project management skills and ability to coordinate complex renovations on tight timelines. What interested me most, however, was a blog post she'd written about. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. About the challenges of running a design business as a solo entrepreneur. She mentioned the difficulty of managing both creative work and administrative tasks, the struggle to find reliable contractors, and her dream of eventually expanding into event planning and staging services. Reading between the lines, I began to see opportunities that Kevin, with his focus on personal rather than professional connections, had likely missed entirely. I spent the next week conducting what I privately called reconnaissance, learning everything I could about Rachel's business while maintaining my normal routine with Kevin and Emma. I discovered that Desert Bloom Interiors had recently landed several major hotel renovation contracts, projects that would require significant coordination and administrative support. I learned that Rachel had been featured in Arizona Home and Garden magazine as an emerging talent to watch in the local design scene. Most importantly, I found out that she'd been actively seeking business partners or associates to help manage her expanding client base. A recent interview in a local business journal mentioned her frustration with trying to handle every aspect of her growing company alone, from initial client consultations to final project installations. By the end of that week, I had formulated a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. If Kevin wanted to pursue a relationship with Rachel Chen under the guise of business collaboration, I would pursue an actual business collaboration with her that had nothing to do with Kevin whatsoever. I would approach her as Lisa Martinez, experienced administrative professional interested in event planning and interior design services, without initially mentioning my connection to her current romantic interest. The plan required careful timing and considerable courage, but it also offered the possibility of turning Kevin's betrayal into my own professional opportunity. If Rachel was as business savvy as her success suggested, she would recognize the value of partnering with someone who could handle the administrative and logistical aspects of her expanding operation. And if Kevin had been misrepresenting his qualifications or intentions, our professional relationship might reveal that deception naturally. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after discovering the affair, I made an appointment to meet with Rachel Chen the following Monday morning. I used my maiden name and my personal email address, presenting myself as a potential business partner interested in discussing collaborative opportunities in the event planning and interior design space. Her assistant confirmed the meeting for 10 a.m. at Desert Bloom Interiors showroom in Old Town Scottsdale. As I prepared for what might be the most important business meeting of my life, I reflected on the strange chain of events that had led me to this point. Kevin's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also inadvertently introduced me to a world of professional possibilities I'd never considered before. If I could navigate the complexities of working with the woman my husband was having an affair with, I might emerge from this crisis stronger and more financially independent than I'd ever been. The irony wasn't lost on me that Kevin's attempt to deceive me had potentially opened doors to opportunities that could benefit our family far more than his fictitious consulting business ever would. Sometimes I was beginning to realize the best response to betrayal wasn't revenge or confrontation but transformation and strategic advancement. Sunday night, as I laid out my best professional outfit and practiced my presentation points, I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement that had nothing to do with Kevin's affair and everything to do with my own potential. Tomorrow I would walk into Rachel Chen's showroom not as the betrayed wife seeking confrontation but as Lisa Martinez, ambitious professional ready to discuss serious business opportunities. Whether Rachel would recognize me from Kevin's social media posts or family photos remained to be seen. Whether she would be interested in legitimate business collaboration despite our complicated personal connections was an open question, but for the first time in months, I was taking action to improve my own circumstances, rather than simply reacting to Kevin's choices and broken promises. The plan was risky, potentially awkward, and definitely unconventional. It was also the first thing I'd done purely for myself and my own professional development in years. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I found myself looking forward to Monday morning with an anticipation that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with possibility. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystal clear Arizona sky that made the desert mountains look close enough to touch. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my navy blazer for the third time, trying to project confidence I wasn't entirely sure I possessed. The outfit was my best attempt at looking like someone who belonged in the world of high-end interior design, though I suspected my Target blazer and department store heels wouldn't fool anyone with a trained eye for quality. My morning routine had been carefully orchestrated to avoid raising Kevin's suspicions. I'd told him I had a dentist appointment before work, which explained why I was dressed more formally than usual. He'd barely looked up from his phone while mumbling something about having another client meeting later in the week, a detail that now carried entirely different implications than it would have a week ago. Emma had been unusually chatty during breakfast, still riding the high from her art show success and eager to share more details about the compliments Ms. Rodriguez had given her painting. I found myself treasuring these moments of normal family interaction, knowing they might become more precious as the situation with Kevin inevitably reached its conclusion. Whatever happened with my meeting today, whatever I discovered about Rachel Chen and her business, our family dynamics were already shifting in ways Emma couldn't yet understand. The drive to Old Town Scottsdale took me through neighborhoods that showcased the dramatic economic disparities of the Phoenix metropolitan area. I passed strip malls and modest apartment complexes similar to our own, then gradually entered areas where the architecture became more distinctive and the landscaping more elaborate. By the time I reached the address for Desert Bloom Interiors, I was surrounded by galleries, boutiques and restaurants that catered to clientele with significantly more disposable income than my family had ever possessed. Rachel's showroom occupied the ground floor of a beautifully restored adobe building, its exterior painted in warm terracotta tones that complemented the desert landscape. Large windows displayed carefully curated vignettes, showcasing furniture, textiles, and decorative objects that seemed to capture the essence of Southwestern elegance without relying on tired cliché. Even from the sidewalk I could see that this was a serious business operation, not the hobby venture of someone playing at entrepreneurship. I arrived 10 minutes early and spent the time walking around the block, using the opportunity to observe the neighborhood and gather my thoughts. The other businesses in the area included an high-end art gallery, a boutique specializing in Native American jewelry, and a restaurant that advertised farm-to-table cuisine with locally sourced ingredients. This was clearly a destination for tourists and affluent locals, the kind of area where successful interior designers would naturally establish their presence. When I finally entered the showroom, a soft chime announced my arrival. The interior was even more impressive than the window displays had suggested, with soaring ceilings, polished concrete floors and carefully arranged furniture groupings that demonstrated various design approaches. Everything felt cohesive yet varied, sophisticated without being intimidating. I could immediately understand why Rachel's business was thriving. A young woman with short auburn hair emerged from what appeared to be an office area in the back of the showroom. She was probably in her mid-20s, dressed in the kind of effortlessly chic outfit that suggested either excellent thrift store skills or a generous clothing budget. Her smile seemed genuine as she approached, extending her hand in greeting. She introduced herself as Sarah, Rachel's assistant, and explained that Rachel was just finishing up a phone call with a client. While we waited, Sarah offered me coffee and began telling me about some of the current projects Desert Bloom Interiors was managing. Her enthusiasm for the work was infectious, and I found myself genuinely interested in the details she shared about coordinating with contractors, managing delivery schedules, and handling the countless logistical challenges that came with high-end renovation projects. Sarah mentioned that they'd recently hired 2 additional part-time staff members to help with project coordination, but Rachel was still handling most of the client relationships and creative decisions herself. The growth was exciting, Sarah explained, but it was also creating bottlenecks that sometimes delayed project timelines or forced Rachel to work extremely long hours. When Rachel finally appeared, I was struck by how different she looked from the woman I'd observed at Desert Rose Cafe. In her professional environment, she radiated competence and authority in ways that had been less apparent during her intimate lunch with Kevin. She was wearing a beautifully tailored dress in deep burgundy, paired with jewelry that looked handcrafted rather than mass-produced. Her confidence was evident in her posture and the way she moved through her space, clearly comfortable in her role as the business owner and creative director. She greeted me warmly, apologizing for the delay and explaining that the phone call had involved coordinating delivery schedules for a major hotel renovation project. As she led me toward a seating area arranged with 2 comfortable chairs and a low table, I noticed that she didn't show any sign of recognizing me. Either Kevin had never shown her photos of his family, or I looked sufficiently different in my professional attire that she didn't make the connection. Rachel began our conversation by asking about my background and what had prompted my interest in potential collaboration with Desert Bloom Interiors. I had prepared for this question extensively, crafting a narrative that was truthful without revealing my connection to Kevin. I explained that I'd been working in medical office administration for several years, developing skills in project coordination, client communication, and managing multiple priorities simultaneously. I told her about my growing interest in event planning and interior design, mentioning that I'd been researching local businesses and had been impressed by Desert Bloom's portfolio and reputation. I explained that I was particularly interested in the administrative and logistical aspects of design work, areas where my existing skills might translate well into a new industry. Rachel listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about my experience with scheduling, vendor coordination, and client relations. She seemed genuinely interested in my background, particularly when I described some of the challenging situations I'd handled at the medical office involving insurance companies, equipment vendors, and demanding patients. As we talked, I began to understand why Kevin had been drawn to her beyond simple physical attraction. Rachel was clearly intelligent and business savvy, with the kind of entrepreneurial energy that could be inspiring to be around. She spoke passionately about her design philosophy and her vision for expanding Desert Bloom Interiors into new service areas, including event planning and property staging for real estate sales. When I mentioned my interest in event planning specifically, Rachel's eyes lit up with obvious excitement. She explained that she'd been receiving increasing requests from clients who wanted help with special events held in spaces she'd designed, but she hadn't had the bandwidth to take on that type of work. The coordination requirements were different from renovation projects, involving vendors like caterers, florists, and entertainment providers, rather than contractors and furniture suppliers. Rachel pulled out a tablet and showed me photos from several recent projects where clients had specifically asked about event planning services. There was a corporate retreat center where the client wanted help organizing team-building events, a private residence where the owners hosted frequent charity fundraisers, and a restaurant space that needed assistance coordinating wine tastings and special dinners. She explained that turning down these opportunities felt like leaving money on the table, but taking them on without proper support would have meant sacrificing quality on her core interior design work. The ideal solution, she said, would be finding a partner who could handle the event planning side of the business while she focused on the design element. As she described her vision for this expansion, I realized that Kevin had probably never understood the real scope of Rachel's business ambitions. His focus on pursuing a personal relationship had blinded him to the genuine professional opportunities that existed within her growing company. While he'd been playing at being a marketing consultant, Rachel had been building something substantial and looking for serious business partners. I asked detailed questions about her current client base, project timelines, and the specific challenges she faced in managing multiple renovation projects simultaneously. Rachel seemed impressed by the sophistication of my questions and began sharing more detailed information about her business operations than I'd expected during a first meeting. She showed me spreadsheets tracking project phases, vendor contact lists, and client communication logs. The level of organization was impressive, but I could see areas where additional administrative support could improve efficiency and reduce the burden on Rachel herself. My experience with medical office systems had taught me to spot bottlenecks and workflow issues, skills that appeared directly applicable to project-based design work. When Rachel mentioned the difficulty of finding reliable contractors and managing their schedules across multiple projects, I shared some strategies I'd developed for coordinating with equipment repair services and medical supply vendors. The challenges were similar: working with independent service providers who had their own schedules and priorities, managing client expectations when delays occurred, and maintaining quality standards while keeping projects on budget. Rachel seemed genuinely impressed by my suggestions and asked if I'd be interested in touring one of their current project sites to get a better sense of the day-to-day realities of design work. I agreed immediately, both because I was genuinely curious about the work and because it would give me more insight into the business Kevin claimed to be involved with. We drove separately to a residential project in Paradise Valley, an affluent area north of Phoenix, where Rachel was overseeing the complete renovation of a mid-century modern home. The property was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased views of Camelback Mountain and a pool area that seemed to blend seamlessly with the desert landscape. Inside, the renovation was in progress, with contractors working on custom cabinetry installation, while Rachel consulted with the homeowners about tile selections for the master bathroom. Watching her work, I could see why her business was successful. She listened carefully to the client's concerns, offered practical solutions to unexpected problems, and maintained a calm, professional demeanor even when the tile delivery arrived 2 hours late and in the wrong color. During the site visit, I noticed several opportunities where better coordination could have prevented minor issues. The tile delay, for example, had occurred because of a communication breakdown between the supplier and the installation crew. The clients had questions about lighting fixtures that could have been addressed earlier in the process with more proactive communication. These weren't major problems, but they were the kind of inefficiencies that could add stress and costs to projects. After we left the job site, Rachel suggested continuing our conversation over lunch. She chose a small cafe in Carefree, about 20 minutes north of the project site, explaining that it was one of her favorite spots for client meetings, because it was quiet enough for serious conversation. The location was far from Scottsdale, far from anywhere. Kevin might unexpectedly appear, which I appreciated more than Rachel could have known. Over salads and iced tea, Rachel became even more candid about her business challenges and aspirations. She explained that Desert Bloom Interiors had reached a point where she needed to either scale back and stay small, or invest in the infrastructure necessary to handle larger projects and serve more clients. The safe choice would be maintaining the status quo, but she was ambitious enough to want to pursue growth opportunities. The conversation shifted to specific partnership possibilities. Rachel explained that she'd been considering several options: hiring additional employees, contracting with freelance project managers, or finding a business partner who could take ownership of specific service areas. Each approach had advantages and disadvantages, but she was particularly interested in the partnership model because it would bring someone into the business who was equally invested in its success. When I asked about the financial aspects of a potential partnership, Rachel was surprisingly open about Desert Bloom's revenue and profit margins. The business was clearly doing well, with project revenues that were significantly higher than I'd expected. Her typical residential projects ranged from $50,000 to over $200,000, with commercial work often involving even larger budgets. Rachel explained that event planning services could potentially add another revenue stream with different seasonal patterns and client bases. Wedding and corporate event planning had peak seasons that complemented the renovation business, which tended to slow during certain times of year. A well-managed event planning division could potentially smooth out revenue fluctuations while attracting clients who might later be interested in design services. As she outlined her vision for the partnership, I began to see possibilities that extended far beyond anything Kevin had ever described. This wasn't about casual marketing consulting or part-time project assistant. Rachel was talking about genuine business expansion that could potentially provide substantial income and professional growth opportunity. The more we talked, the more convinced I became that Kevin had completely misunderstood or misrepresented the nature of his relationship with Rachel and her business. Either he'd never had serious discussions about legitimate consulting work, or he'd chosen to focus on personal rather than professional aspects of their interactions. By the time we finished lunch, Rachel was openly discussing the possibility of a formal business partnership. She suggested that I spend some time researching the event planning industry and developing a more detailed proposal for how such a partnership might work. She offered to introduce me to some of her current clients who had expressed interest in event services, and suggested that I attend an upcoming industry networking event where I could meet other professionals in related fields. The conversation felt surreal. 3 hours earlier, I'd walked into Rachel's showroom as the wife of a man having an affair with her, unsure whether she would even be interested in meeting with me. Now I was leaving with what amounted to a serious business proposition and the beginning of what could become a significant professional relationship. During the drive back to Phoenix, I found myself reassessing everything I thought I knew about Kevin's situation. If Rachel was genuinely interested in business partnerships and had been actively seeking someone with my skill set, what had Kevin been offering her? Had he misrepresented his qualifications so completely that she'd never taken him seriously as a business partner? Or had their relationship been purely personal from the beginning, with the business consulting story serving as a cover for their affair? I realized that Kevin might have stumbled into Rachel's orbit through legitimate networking or professional connections, but had been too focused on pursuing a romantic relationship to recognize or pursue the real business opportunities that existed. While he'd been playing at being a consultant and lying to me about client meetings, Rachel had been building a substantial business and looking for serious partners. The irony was almost overwhelming. Kevin's deception had inadvertently introduced me to professional opportunities that he'd been too distracted or unqualified to pursue himself. His affair had opened doors that might never have been available to me otherwise, connecting me with someone whose business ambitions aligned with skills I'd been developing for years without realizing their potential value. That evening, after picking up Emma from after-school care and helping her with homework, I found myself looking at our modest apartment with new eyes. The financial stress that had been weighing on our family for months suddenly seemed less permanent and insurmountable. If Rachel's partnership offer was genuine, if I could successfully transition into event planning and project coordination work, our economic situation could improve dramatically. Emma was working on a math worksheet at the kitchen table when Kevin arrived home, later than usual and with the slightly distracted air that I now recognized as the aftermath of time spent with Rachel. He asked about my day in the perfunctory way that had become typical, not really listening to my response about the dentist appointment and routine work tasks. As I prepared dinner, Kevin retreated to his laptop, claiming he needed to follow up on some client communication. I watched him typing with the kind of focused attention he rarely devoted to household responsibilities, and wondered what kind of messages he was actually sending. Was he coordinating with Rachel about their next personal meeting? Was he still attempting to present himself as a serious business consultant? Or had their relationship evolved beyond any pretense of professional collaboration? The questions felt less urgent than they would have a week ago, not because the betrayal hurt less, but because I was beginning to see a path forward that didn't depend on Kevin's choices or reliability. For the first time in our marriage, I was developing opportunities that were entirely my own, based on my own skills and professional relationships. After dinner, while Kevin claimed to be working on client proposals and Emma was absorbed in reading a library book about famous artists, I opened my laptop and began researching the event planning industry in Arizona. I wanted to understand market trends, typical service offerings, and competitive landscape before my next conversation with Rachel. The research was fascinating and encouraging. The Phoenix area had a robust events industry, driven by tourism, corporate relocations, and a growing population of affluent retirees. Wedding planning alone represented a multi-million-dollar local market, with additional opportunities in corporate events, charity fundraisers, and private celebrations. I found several professional organizations for event planners, certification programs that could enhance my credentials, and industry publications that could help me understand best practices and emerging trends. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that event planning could be a natural extension of my existing administrative and coordination skills. I also researched Rachel's competition in the interior design space, trying to understand how Desert Bloom Interiors compared to other local firms. Rachel's business was clearly well regarded, with positive reviews and an impressive portfolio, but there were several larger firms that offered services she didn't currently provide. Expanding into event planning could help differentiate her business and potentially attract clients from competitors. By the time I closed my laptop that night, I had filled several pages with notes and identified numerous questions I wanted to discuss with Rachel in our next meeting. The prospect of building something significant and independent felt exhilarating in ways I hadn't anticipated. As I prepared for bed, Kevin was still focused on his laptop, occasionally chuckling at something on his screen in ways that seemed more personal than professional. I found myself feeling detached from his behavior rather than hurt or angry. His affair with Rachel was still a betrayal that would need to be addressed, but it was no longer the central crisis dominating my thoughts. Instead, I was focused on the possibilities that had emerged from what should have been a purely destructive situation. Kevin's deception had inadvertently connected me with professional opportunities that could transform our family's financial future. While he'd been pursuing a relationship that would inevitably complicate his life, I'd been developing connections that could simplify and improve mine. The next morning brought another carefully orchestrated routine designed to avoid raising Kevin's suspicions while I continued exploring the partnership opportunity with Rachel. I'd arranged to take a longer lunch break so I could attend the industry networking event Rachel had recommended, where I hoped to meet other event planning professionals and learn more about the local market. The event was held at a resort in Scottsdale in a ballroom that showcased exactly the kind of sophisticated event coordination I was hoping to learn more about. The space was beautifully designed, with lighting that enhanced the architecture and table arrangements that encouraged conversation while maintaining clear sight lines to the presentation area. I arrived early and spent time observing how the event had been organized, taking mental notes about vendor coordination, timing, and guest flow. The attention to detail was impressive, from the registration process to the carefully planned refreshment stations that kept attendees engaged throughout the program. Rachel had arranged to meet me at the event, and when she arrived, she immediately began introducing me to other professionals as her potential new business partner. The introductions felt both thrilling and terrifying, but also surprisingly natural. The people we met seemed genuinely interested in my background and the possibility of Desert Bloom Interiors expanding into event planning. I met wedding planners who specialized in destination ceremonies, corporate event coordinators who managed conferences and product launches, and nonprofit fundraising specialists who organized charity galas. Each conversation revealed different aspects of the industry and potential collaboration opportunities that I hadn't previously considered. One conversation particularly stood out. A woman named Patricia, who ran a successful corporate event planning business, explained how she'd transitioned from administrative work in the hospitality industry to event coordination. Her path had been similar to what I was considering, and she was enthusiastic about the advantages of partnering with an established interior design firm. Patricia explained that many of her clients were interested in comprehensive services that included both event planning and space design. Corporate retreats often involved temporary space modifications, product launches required custom display installations, and charity fundraisers benefited from sophisticated decor that enhanced the fundraising atmosphere. Having access to design expertise could set an event planning business apart from competitors who focused solely on logistics. During the networking reception that followed the formal presentations, Rachel and I continued meeting people and learning about industry trends. I was struck by how collaborative the community seemed, with established professionals willing to share advice and resources with newcomers. Several people gave me their business cards and offered to continue conversations about potential partnerships or referral relationships. By the end of the event, I had collected enough information and contacts to begin developing a comprehensive business plan for the partnership Rachel had proposed. More importantly, I had gained confidence that the transition from medical office administration to event planning was not only possible but potentially lucrative. Rachel seemed pleased by how the networking had gone and suggested that we schedule a more formal meeting to discuss partnership terms and implementation timeline. She explained that she had several clients who were already asking about event services, which meant we could potentially launch the new division with existing customer relationships, rather than having to build a client base from scratch. As we walked to the parking area after the event, Rachel mentioned that she'd been thinking about our previous conversation and had some specific ideas about how to structure a partnership agreement. She suggested meeting later in the week to review financial projections and discuss operational details. The drive back to the medical office gave me time to process everything I'd learned and experienced. The networking event had transformed abstract possibilities into concrete opportunities, and Rachel's continued enthusiasm for the partnership made it feel increasingly real and achievable. I returned to work energized and focused, handling the afternoon's patient scheduling and insurance calls with renewed appreciation for the organizational skills that would translate well into event. Morrison commented on my positive mood, and I found myself thinking about how to eventually transition away from the medical office in a way that maintained good relationships while pursuing new opportunities. That evening, Emma was excited to show me a new art project she'd started at school, inspired by the positive feedback she'd received at the art show. As I admired her latest watercolor painting, I reflected on how pursuing the partnership with Rachel could potentially provide more flexibility to support Emma's artistic interests and extracurricular activities. Kevin arrived home even later than usual, with explanations about client calls that had run long and unexpected project complications. His stories were becoming increasingly elaborate and less believable, but I found myself caring less about the details of his deception and more about the timeline for finalizing my own professional plan. The contrast between Kevin's fictional consulting business and the real opportunities I was developing with Rachel felt increasingly stark. While he was constructing elaborate lies to cover his affair, I was building genuine professional relationships that could benefit our entire family. That night, as I prepared for another meeting with Rachel to discuss partnership specifics, I realized that Kevin's betrayal had become the catalyst for the most significant professional opportunity of my life. His affair had introduced me to someone whose business vision aligned perfectly with skills I'd been developing for years without recognizing their potential value. The situation was complicated and emotionally challenging, but it was also opening doors I'd never imagined could exist. For the first time in our marriage, I was developing plans and making decisions that didn't depend on Kevin's reliability or truthfulness. Whatever happened with our relationship, I was building something that would be entirely mine. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Desert Bloom Interiors parking lot as I sat in my car, watching Kevin's silver Honda pull into a space 3 rows away from where I waited. He was 45 minutes early for what he'd told me was a crucial client presentation, carrying a leather portfolio I'd never seen before and wearing the expensive cologne that had mysteriously appeared in our bathroom cabinet last month. My hands remained steady on the steering wheel, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. 3 weeks of careful planning had led to this moment. 3 weeks of building genuine business relationships with Rachel while Kevin continued his elaborate charade. Today I would finally confront both of them, but not in the way either would expect. Kevin disappeared into the building through the main entrance, his confident stride suggesting he felt completely secure in his deception. He had no idea that I'd spent the previous evening finalizing partnership agreements with Rachel, or that she was expecting me for a follow-up meeting in 30 minutes to discuss our first joint client presentation. I waited another 10 minutes before following him inside, using the time to review my notes and center myself for what promised to be one of the most challenging conversations of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to enter a business meeting as a legitimate partner while my husband was presumably there under false pretenses. The showroom buzzed with activity as Sarah directed a delivery crew arranging furniture samples for an upcoming client consultation. She greeted me warmly, explaining that Rachel was already in the conference room with another visitor but would be ready for our meeting shortly. Through the glass wall, I could see Kevin gesturing animatedly while Rachel listened with what appeared to be polite attention rather than romantic interest. I positioned myself where I could observe their interaction without being immediately visible to Kevin. His body language suggested he was making some kind of proposal or presentation, leaning forward earnestly while pointing to documents spread across the conference table. Rachel's posture was more reserved, professional rather than intimate, suggesting this was indeed a business conversation rather than a romantic encounter. After 15 minutes, Kevin's presentation seemed to conclude. Rachel was nodding politely while gathering the papers he'd brought, her expression diplomatically neutral. Even from a distance, I could sense that whatever Kevin had proposed wasn't receiving the enthusiastic reception he'd hoped for. When the conference room door opened, Kevin emerged looking less confident than when he'd entered. Rachel followed, shaking his hand with the kind of formal courtesy reserved for disappointing business interaction. Kevin glanced around the showroom as if hoping for additional conversation, but Rachel had already turned her attention to Sarah and some urgent delivery questions. That's when Kevin spotted me standing near a display of vintage southwestern pottery, his face cycling through shock, confusion and something approaching panic in rapid succession. For a moment he seemed frozen, trying to process why his wife would be in his supposed client's showroom during his important business meeting. Rachel noticed Kevin's distracted expression and followed his gaze, her own surprise evident when she saw me waiting nearby. I watched as understanding dawned in her eyes, the connections forming as she realized the significance of seeing Kevin's wife in her place of business on the same day he'd requested a meeting. Kevin recovered first, approaching me with a forced smile and the kind of overly casual tone he used when caught in uncomfortable situations. He asked what I was doing there, as if my presence was the unexpected element rather than his own deception. I could see him rapidly calculating explanations, trying to construct a narrative that would account for this collision of his two worlds. Before I could respond, Rachel joined us, her professional composure intact despite what must have been a bewildering situation. She introduced herself to me using her full name and business title, extending her hand in greeting as if we'd never met before. Her discretion in that moment told me everything I needed to know about her character and business acumen. I shook her hand and introduced myself as Lisa Martinez, Kevin's wife, watching Kevin's face for his reaction to this formal introduction between the two women in his life. His expression suggested he was still trying to understand how we'd ended up in the same place at the same time, whether this was coincidence or something more deliberate. Rachel, demonstrating remarkable poise under circumstances that could have been explosively awkward, suggested we all move to her office to continue the conversation privately. Her suggestion was diplomatically phrased but carried the undertone of someone who recognized the need to manage a potentially volatile situation away from staff and client. In the privacy of Rachel's office, with the door closed and the three of us arranged in a triangle of tension, I finally spoke the words I'd been rehearsing for weeks. I told Kevin that I knew about his relationship with Rachel, that I'd seen them together at Desert Rose Cafe, and that I was aware his supposed client meetings were actually personal encounters. Kevin's initial response was predictable denial, followed by attempts to minimize the significance of what I'd observed. He claimed their relationship was purely professional, that any personal interactions were simply part of building client rapport, and that I was misinterpreting innocent business lunch. Rachel remained silent during Kevin's explanations, her expression carefully neutral but her discomfort increasingly apparent. When Kevin finally stopped talking, she spoke quietly but clearly, acknowledging that their relationship had become personal but emphasizing that it had never interfered with her business judgment or professional obligation. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd imagined during my weeks of planning. Instead of emotional explosions or dramatic accusations, we found ourselves engaged in what amounted to a complex negotiation involving personal relationships, business partnerships, and the future of multiple interconnected lives. Rachel explained that Kevin had approached her months ago claiming expertise in digital marketing and business development, offering services that her growing company genuinely needed. Their initial meetings had been purely professional, focused on marketing strategies and client acquisition techniques that Kevin presented as his areas of specialization. The personal relationship had developed gradually, Rachel continued, as Kevin had proved charming and attentive in ways that contrasted sharply with her previous romantic experience. She'd been recently divorced herself, struggling with the demands of building a business while managing personal loneliness, making her vulnerable to Kevin's focused attention and apparent understanding of entrepreneurial challenge. What became clear during Rachel's explanation was that Kevin had never delivered on any of his professional promises. The marketing strategies he'd proposed were generic and impractical, his industry knowledge was superficial, and his business development suggestions demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of her target market and service offering. Rachel had gradually realized that Kevin's professional qualifications were largely fictional, but by then their personal relationship had complicated any straightforward business evaluation. She'd continued meeting with him more out of romantic interest than genuine hope for productive professional collaboration. Kevin's face reddened as Rachel detailed the inadequacy of his supposed business expertise, his carefully constructed consultant persona crumbling under professional scrutiny. He attempted to defend his qualifications, citing unnamed previous clients and unverifiable success stories, but his explanations only highlighted the gaps between his claims and reality. That's when I revealed the true purpose of my presence at Desert Bloom Interior. I explained to both of them that I'd been meeting with Rachel for several weeks, developing a legitimate business partnership that capitalized on my actual skills and her genuine expansion needs. The shock on Kevin's face was profound as I described the event planning partnership Rachel and I had been negotiating, the client meetings I'd attended, and the business plan we'd developed together. His affair had inadvertently introduced me to professional opportunities that his own deception had prevented him from recognizing or pursuing. Rachel confirmed our partnership discussions, explaining that my administrative and coordination experience was exactly what Desert Bloom Interiors needed to expand into event planning services. She detailed the client requests she'd been receiving, the market research we'd conducted together, and the financial projections that supported adding event coordination to her service offering. Kevin struggled to process this information, asking repeatedly how long Rachel and I had been meeting and whether we'd planned this confrontation together. The possibility that his wife and his romantic interest had developed an independent business relationship while he'd been lying to both of them seemed to overwhelm his capacity for strategic thinking. I assured him that our business partnership had developed organically, based on genuine professional compatibility and market opportunity, not as some elaborate revenge scheme. Rachel and I had discussed the awkwardness of our personal connections, but had concluded that business decisions should be based on practical considerations rather than emotional complications. The conversation shifted to practical questions about how to manage the situation going forward. Kevin's relationship with Rachel was clearly over, ended by the revelation of his dishonesty about both his professional qualifications and his marital status. Rachel had been unaware that Kevin was still living at home and presenting himself as a committed family man to me and Em. Rachel apologized to me for her role in Kevin's deception, explaining that she'd believed his claims about separation and pending divorce proceedings. She'd been told that he was sleeping on a friend's couch while waiting for legal paperwork to be finalized, not that he was returning home every night to his wife and daughter. Kevin's attempts to salvage either relationship were met with polite but firm rejection from Rachel and calm determination from me. His lies had been too extensive and his manipulation too calculated for either woman to consider continuing any form of personal relationship with him. The business partnership between Rachel and me, however, remained solid. We'd built our professional relationship on honest communication, complementary skills, and genuine market opportunity. Kevin's deception had brought us together, but our collaboration was based on factors that had nothing to do with him or his behavior. As the meeting concluded, Kevin found himself in the unprecedented position of being dismissed by both women simultaneously.
Rachel made it clear that she would not be requiring his consulting services, and I informed him that I would be pursuing divorce proceedings while maintaining my business partnership with Rachel. The ride home passed in tense silence, Kevin alternately attempting explanations and making accusations about my supposed betrayal in developing a business relationship behind his back. His inability to recognize the irony in accusing me of deception while his own affair sat exposed between us demonstrated just how completely he'd lost perspective on the situation. That evening, while Kevin retreated to his laptop to presumably process the destruction of his carefully constructed double life, I sat with Emma, helping her with a school project about career aspiration. She was creating a poster about different jobs she might want to pursue as an adult, and I found myself describing event planning with genuine enthusiasm for the first time. Emma was fascinated by the idea of coordinating weddings and parties, asking detailed questions about how someone would choose flowers, plan menus, and make sure everything happened at the right time. Her excitement about my new career direction felt like validation that pursuing this opportunity was about more than just escaping Kevin's deception. The transformation happening in our household was subtle but profound. While Kevin struggled with the collapse of his fictional consultant identity and the end of his relationship with Rachel, I was energized by legitimate professional prospects and the prospect of financial independence. Over the following days, Kevin made several attempts to reconcile, promising to end his relationship with Rachel and commit fully to our marriage and family.
His proposals included couples counseling, renewed attention to Emma's activities, and even suggestions that he could find legitimate employment to contribute more consistently to our household income. I listened to his promises with the detachment that comes from finally understanding someone's true character. Kevin's willingness to lie extensively to both me and Rachel, his casual dismissal of Emma's important events, and his fundamental dishonesty about his professional qualifications had revealed aspects of his personality that couldn't be addressed through counseling or good intentions. More importantly, I'd discovered capabilities and opportunities that I'd never known existed. The partnership with Rachel had shown me that my administrative skills were valuable in contexts I'd never considered, and that I was capable of building professional relationships based on competence rather than just reliability. The contrast between Kevin's fictional business success and my emerging real opportunities became more stark with each passing day. While he'd been constructing elaborate lies about client meetings and marketing expertise, I'd been developing genuine professional relationships and learning about an industry where my skills were genuinely valued. Rachel and I formalized our partnership agreement during a meeting at her attorney's office, creating a legal structure that protected both our interests while allowing for future expansion of the business relationship. The event planning division of Desert Bloom Interiors would launch within 60 days, with me handling coordination and logistics while Rachel maintained creative control over design elements. Our first joint client was a corporate retreat planning project that perfectly combined Rachel's design expertise with the coordination skills I'd been developing. The client was a tech company relocating to Phoenix that needed help with both office space design and team building events for their new location. Working with Rachel on the proposal and presentation process was revelatory. Her creative vision and business acumen were impressive, but she clearly benefited from having someone handle the logistical details that had been overwhelming her capacity to take on larger projects. The client meeting went exceptionally well, with Rachel presenting design concepts while I outlined implementation timelines and coordination processes. Our complementary skills created a more comprehensive service offering than either of us could have provided independently. When we won the contract, worth significantly more than any project Rachel had landed working alone, I realized that Kevin's deception had inadvertently launched me into the most lucrative career opportunity of my life. His affair had connected me with someone whose business vision aligned perfectly with capabilities I'd been developing for years without recognizing their commercial value. The financial implications were transformative. My share of the partnership profits would be substantially higher than my medical office salary, with the potential for continued growth as we expanded our client base and service offering. For the first time in our marriage, I would be contributing more to our household income than Kevin, assuming he found legitimate employment. Emma seemed to thrive on the increased energy and optimism in our household, even as she remained largely unaware of the specifics of her parents' relationship crisis. She was excited about my new career and proud to tell her friends that her mother was starting her own business with a famous designer. Kevin's job search was progressing slowly, hampered by his lack of genuine marketing experience and the discovery that many of his supposed professional accomplishments were fictional. The elaborate consultant persona he'd constructed for Rachel's benefit had never been supported by actual work history or verifiable achievement. His attempts to reconnect with me and repair our marriage were increasingly half-hearted, perhaps reflecting his growing realization that I was no longer financially dependent on his contributions or emotionally invested in maintaining our relationship at any cost. The divorce consultation I'd scheduled with Patricia Sanderson was surprisingly straightforward. Our limited shared assets and my newfound earning potential simplified the legal proceedings considerably. Kevin's deception had actually made the separation cleaner by eliminating ambiguity about the relationship's viability. As I prepared for our first major event planning project, coordinating a product launch party for one of Rachel's existing clients, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. Kevin's betrayal had been painful and disruptive, but it had also opened doors I'd never imagined could exist. The irony was almost overwhelming. Kevin's pursuit of a relationship with Rachel under false pretenses had introduced me to professional opportunities that his own dishonesty had prevented him from recognizing. While he'd been focused on romantic conquest, I'd been building something substantial and sustainable. Working late in Rachel's showroom, finalizing vendor contracts and coordination schedules for our upcoming events, I felt a sense of purpose and competence that had been missing from my life for years. The partnership was challenging and demanding, but it was also deeply satisfying in ways that my previous administrative work had never been. Rachel emerged from her office carrying coffee for both of us, settling into the chair across from my temporary workspace with a satisfied expression. She'd been reviewing financial projections for the next quarter, and the numbers were encouraging enough to support hiring additional staff and expanding our service offerings even further. As we discussed plans for the future, I realized that Kevin's affair had become the catalyst for the most significant positive change in my professional life. His deception had hurt our family and damaged our marriage beyond repair, but it had also connected me with opportunities that were transforming our economic situation and my own sense of personal capability. The situation was complex and emotionally challenging, but the business partnership Rachel and I had built was providing stability and growth potential that completely overshadowed the destruction Kevin's lies had caused. While he struggled to rebuild his identity and find legitimate employment, I was thriving in ways I'd never thought possible. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed and listened to her excited plans for visiting my office during her upcoming school break, I felt grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought me to this point. Kevin's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the beginning of the most empowering period of my adult life. Whatever challenges lay ahead in managing our divorce and custody arrangements, I was facing them from a position of strength and independence that wouldn't have been possible without the professional opportunities that had emerged from his deception. Sometimes I was learning, the best response to betrayal wasn't revenge or anger, but transformation and strategic advancement that rendered the betrayer irrelevant to your success. The morning of our first major event dawned with the kind of perfect Arizona weather that event planners dream about. Clear skies, gentle breeze, and temperatures that would allow for both indoor and outdoor activities without forcing guests to choose between comfort and participation. I stood on the terrace of the Phoenician resort, watching the setup crew arrange tables and lighting fixtures according to the detailed timeline Rachel and I had spent weeks perfecting. This wasn't just any corporate event. We were coordinating the official Phoenix launch party for Meridian Tech Solutions, a software company relocating their headquarters from Seattle to capture Arizona's growing technology sector. The guest list included local business leaders, potential clients, and media representatives who could significantly impact the company's regional success. The pressure was substantial, but so was the opportunity to establish Desert Bloom Interiors as the premier choice for high-profile corporate events in the Phoenix market. Rachel moved through the setup area with the focused intensity of someone who understood that every detail mattered. She was coordinating with florists about centerpiece placement while simultaneously consulting with the lighting technician about accent illumination that would highlight her custom backdrop design. Her ability to manage multiple complex conversations while maintaining creative oversight was impressive to witness, and I understood why her business had grown so rapidly. My role was equally demanding but different in nature. I was tracking vendor arrival times, managing the catering timeline, and coordinating with hotel staff about logistics that could make or break the evening's success. The clipboard in my hands contained detailed schedules for equipment, delivery, setup phases, and contingency plans for the dozens of things that could potentially go wrong during a large-scale event. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I checked items off my coordination list. 6 months ago, I'd been struggling to manage our household budget while Kevin claimed to be building a consulting business. Now I was overseeing a $20,000 corporate event that would generate substantial revenue for the partnership Rachel and I had built together. Kevin's deception had inadvertently launched me into a career that was more financially rewarding and personally satisfying than anything I'd ever imagined possible. 3 weeks had passed since our confrontation in Rachel's office, 3 weeks during which Kevin had moved out of our apartment and begun the difficult process of rebuilding his life without the fictional professional identity he'd constructed. His job search was progressing slowly, hampered by his lack of genuine marketing experience and the awkward explanations required when potential employers asked about the gap between his claimed expertise and his actual work history. Emma had adapted to her father's absence with resilience that both impressed and concerned me. She'd asked direct questions about why Daddy wasn't living with us anymore, and I'd given her age-appropriate explanations about adults sometimes making choices that meant families needed to change their living arrangement. She seemed more curious than distressed, perhaps because Kevin's presence in our daily life had been inconsistent enough that his physical absence wasn't dramatically disruptive. The custody arrangement we'd worked out through mediation was straightforward and focused on Emma's needs, rather than Kevin's convenience. He could see her every other weekend and one evening per week, provided he maintained stable housing and employment. The arrangement included provisions for Emma's activities and school events, ensuring that Kevin's unreliability wouldn't continue to disappoint her during important moments. Rachel approached me as I was consulting with the catering manager about the appetizer service timeline, her expression carrying the kind of focused energy that indicated she'd identified a potential problem requiring immediate attention. The custom wine selection we'd ordered for the event had arrived, but 3 bottles had been damaged during transport, leaving us short of the specific vintage the client had requested for their toast ceremony. I immediately began working through solutions, contacting our backup vendor while Rachel called her wine distributor to arrange emergency replacement delivery. The coordination required precise timing and multiple contingency options, but within 30 minutes, we'd secured the necessary bottles and adjusted the delivery schedule to ensure everything would be ready before guests arrived. These were exactly the kinds of challenges that had overwhelmed Rachel when she'd been trying to manage both design and coordination responsibilities alone. Having someone dedicated to handling logistical problems while she focused on creative elements had transformed her ability to take on larger, more complex projects without compromising quality or timeline commitment. The guest list for tonight's event included several potential clients who could provide future business opportunities for our partnership. Patricia Martinez, the executive director of a major nonprofit organization, had expressed interest in our services for their annual fundraising gala. David Chen, who owned a chain of upscale restaurants, was considering hiring us to coordinate grand opening events for his upcoming Phoenix location. More significantly, tonight's event was being attended by representatives from Phoenix Convention and Visitors Bureau, who were evaluating local vendors for a series of large-scale conferences scheduled for the following year. Landing contracts with the CVB could establish our partnership as a major player in the regional events industry and provide steady revenue stream that would support continued business expansion. As the afternoon progressed and setup activities intensified, I found myself moving through the coordination process with confidence that surprised me. 6 months ago, the complexity of managing multiple vendors, coordinating timeline dependencies, and handling unexpected problems would have felt overwhelming. Now these challenges felt like natural extensions of skills I'd been developing for years without recognizing their commercial value. The transformation wasn't just professional. The financial independence that came with partnership profits was changing fundamental aspects of how I approached decision-making and long-term planning. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't constantly worried about stretching our budget to cover basic expenses, or making sacrifices to accommodate Kevin's inconsistent income contributions. Emma's art classes could continue without financial stress. I could consider upgrading our apartment to a place with better schools and more space for her to pursue creative activity. The constant background anxiety about money that had dominated our household for years was finally lifting, replaced by optimism about future possibilities that weren't dependent on Kevin's promises or reliability. Rachel joined me near the main entrance as we conducted a final walkthrough of the event space, checking sightlines, traffic flow, and backup equipment placement. The setup was flawless, reflecting hours of detailed planning and coordination between multiple vendors and venues. The custom lighting highlighted her design elements perfectly, creating an atmosphere that was both professional and welcoming. We'd allocated time for a brief break before guests began arriving, an opportunity to change into our evening attire and mentally prepare for the networking and client relationship responsibilities that would define the next 4 hours. This wasn't just about executing a successful event. It was about establishing relationships that could sustain and grow our business partnership for years to come. The dress I'd chosen for the evening was a significant departure from my usual professional wardrobe. Deep navy blue with subtle metallic threading that caught light beautifully, it projected confidence and sophistication in ways that felt both authentic and aspirational. The investment had been substantial, but looking professional at high-end events was a business expense that would pay dividends in client confidence and networking opportunity. Rachel emerged from the changing area looking stunning in a burgundy dress that complemented the event's color scheme, while maintaining her distinctive personal style. Her jewelry was handcrafted silver with turquoise accents that referenced Southwestern design traditions without being cliché or obvious. Together we looked like exactly what we were: successful businesswomen who understood both creativity and commerce. The first guests began arriving precisely at 6 o'clock, with early attendees including several local business leaders, whose presence would encourage others to view the event as significant and well-connected. I moved through the crowd with renewed confidence, introducing myself as Rachel's business partner and discussing our expanding service offerings with potential clients, who seemed genuinely interested in our capabilities. The networking aspect of the evening was revelatory. 6 months ago, I would have felt intimidated by conversations with successful entrepreneurs and corporate executives. Now armed with genuine expertise and recent project success, I found myself engaging in sophisticated discussions about market trends, service differentiation, and strategic partnerships that could benefit all parties involved. Patricia Martinez proved to be exactly the kind of client our partnership was designed to serve. Her nonprofit's annual fundraising gala required comprehensive event coordination, combined with sophisticated design elements that would encourage major donor contributions. The budget was substantial, the timeline was challenging, and the stakes were high enough to require vendors with proven track records of success. During our conversation, Patricia explained that their previous event planning firm had focused solely on logistics, leaving the organization to coordinate separately with florists, lighting specialists, and venue designer. The result had been visually impressive but operationally problematic, with coordination gaps that had created stress and inefficiency throughout the planning process. Our integrated approach, combining Rachel's design expertise with my coordination capabilities, offered exactly the kind of comprehensive service Patricia's organization needed. We could manage both creative and logistical elements within a single partnership, eliminating communication problems while ensuring that aesthetic and practical considerations were balanced throughout the planning process. By the time the evening's formal presentation began, I'd collected business cards from 6 potential clients and scheduled 3 follow-up meetings for the coming week. The response to our partnership concept was overwhelmingly positive, with several attendees commenting that the combination of design and coordination services addressed pain points they'd experienced with other vendors. The client presentation went flawlessly, with Meridian Tech's CEO praising both the visual impact of Rachel's design work
and the seamless coordination that had allowed their team to focus on content rather than logistics. Several attendees approached us afterward asking about availability for their own upcoming events, suggesting that tonight's success would generate substantial future business opportunities. As the evening wound down and cleanup activities began, Rachel and I worked together to coordinate vendor departure and equipment removal with the same attention to detail we'd applied to setup. The partnership was proving effective not just during high-pressure event execution, but throughout the entire project lifecycle from initial planning through final completion. The financial results exceeded our projections significantly. Between the base event coordination fee, design elements markup, and vendor coordination commissions, our profit from tonight's event alone was more than I'd earned in 2 months at the medical office. More importantly, the client satisfaction and networking connections we'd established would likely generate multiple future projects worth substantially more than tonight's revenue. During the drive home, I reflected on the dramatic transformation my life had undergone in less than 6 months. Kevin's affair had been devastating personally, but professionally, it had been the catalyst for opportunities that wouldn't have been available otherwise. His deception had introduced me to Rachel, whose business vision and expansion needs had aligned perfectly with capabilities I'd been developing for years. The partnership agreement we'd signed included provisions for continued expansion into related service areas, including wedding planning, corporate retreat coordination, and luxury residential staging for real estate sales. Each additional service line represented potential revenue growth and professional development opportunities that could establish us as the premier full-service events and design firm in the Phoenix market. Emma was asleep when I arrived home, but I found a note she'd left on my pillow expressing excitement about visiting my office the next day to see photos from tonight's event. Her pride in my professional success was evident in the drawings she'd been creating, that depicted her mother as a successful businesswoman wearing fancy clothes and coordinating elaborate parties. The apartment felt different now, more spacious and peaceful without Kevin's presence and the constant tension his deception had created. Emma and I were developing new routines that reflected our changed circumstances while maintaining stability she needed during this transition period. Her adjustment to our modified family structure seemed remarkably smooth, perhaps because our financial situation had improved enough to reduce many stress factors that had previously affected our household dynamic. 2 days later, I received a call that would transform our partnership beyond anything Rachel and I had initially envisioned. The Phoenix Convention and Visitors Bureau had been so impressed with our work at the Meridian Tech event that they wanted to discuss a comprehensive service contract covering multiple conferences and special events throughout the coming year. The contract they proposed was substantial enough to require expanding our staff and potentially relocating to larger office space that could accommodate increased administrative demand. The revenue projections supported hiring 2 additional coordination specialists and possibly a junior designer who could handle smaller projects while Rachel focused on major client relationships and creative development. Rachel and I spent hours discussing the implications and opportunities represented by the CVB contract. Accepting it would transform our partnership from a small but successful local operation into a significant regional player with resources to compete for major contracts throughout Arizona and neighboring states. The decision required careful consideration of multiple factors including staffing costs, office space requirements, equipment investments, and the impact of rapid growth on service quality and client relationships. We consulted with business advisors, reviewed financial projections, and considered various expansion scenarios before concluding that the opportunity was too significant to decline. 3 weeks later, we signed a comprehensive agreement with the Convention and Visitors Bureau that guaranteed substantial revenue for the next 18 months while providing stability necessary for strategic expansion. The contract included coordination services for 12 major conferences, 3 special events, and ongoing consulting about vendor selection and venue optimization. The success had been so rapid and substantial that I sometimes struggled to believe the transformation was real. Less than 6 months ago, I'd been struggling to make ends meet while Kevin constructed elaborate lies about his professional achievements. Now I was co-owner of a thriving business partnership with expansion opportunities that could establish us as major players in Arizona's events industry. Emma's reaction to our success was pure delight mixed with curiosity about what it meant for our daily lives. She was excited about the possibility of moving to a larger apartment with space for her art supplies and maybe even a small pet. Her questions about my work had become more sophisticated as she'd observed the complexity and creativity involved in coordinating major events. The custody arrangement with Kevin was proceeding smoothly, partly because his own circumstances had stabilized after he'd finally found legitimate employment with a small marketing firm that appreciated his charm and creativity while providing supervision for his more ambitious claims. His relationship with Emma remained affectionate but structured around realistic expectations rather than grand promises he couldn't fulfill. 6 months after Kevin's affair had been exposed, Rachel and I were featured in Phoenix Business Journal as emerging entrepreneurs whose innovative partnership model was disrupting traditional approaches to event planning and interior design service. The article highlighted our integrated service approach and rapid business growth while positioning us as leaders in Arizona's expanding hospitality and events sector. Reading the article while sitting in our new office space, surrounded by design portfolios and coordination charts for upcoming projects, I reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought me to this point. Kevin's betrayal had been painful and disruptive, but it had also been the beginning of the most rewarding period of my professional life. The partnership with Rachel had evolved into genuine friendship based on mutual respect, complementary skills, and shared vision for continued growth and innovation. We'd learned to navigate the awkward origins of our relationship while building something substantial that benefited both our professional ambitions and personal goals. Emma flourished in our new circumstances, thriving academically while pursuing artistic interests that were now financially feasible and actively encouraged. Her confidence had grown along with our family's stability, and she spoke proudly about her mother's business success when discussing career aspirations with classmates and teachers. The financial independence I'd achieved through the partnership had transformed every aspect of my life, from daily decision-making to long-term planning. The constant anxiety about money that had characterized my marriage to Kevin had been replaced by optimism about future possibilities and confidence in my ability to provide for Emma's needs and opportunities. As I prepared for another networking event where Rachel and I would be presenting our services to potential clients, I acquisied the lessons learned during this period of dramatic personal and professional transformation. Kevin's deception had taught me the importance of building relationships based on honesty and mutual benefit rather than fantasy and manipulation. More importantly, the experience had revealed capabilities and ambitions I'd never recognized within myself. The administrative skills I'd developed over years of medical office work had translated perfectly into event coordination, while the interpersonal abilities I'd used to manage difficult patients and insurance companies proved valuable for client relationship management and vendor negotiation. That evening, as Emma and I reviewed photos from recent events while planning her upcoming birthday celebration, I felt profound gratitude for the unexpected path that had led us to this point. Kevin's affair had been the catalyst for positive changes that wouldn't have been possible within the constraints of our previous life together. The business partnership with Rachel continued to exceed our projections, with new contracts and expansion opportunities emerging regularly, as our reputation for excellence and innovation spread throughout Arizona's business community. We'd established ourselves as the preferred choice for clients who valued both creative vision and operational competence. Looking toward the future, I saw possibilities that extended far beyond anything I'd imagined during those difficult weeks when Kevin's deception was first being revealed. The partnership had opened doors to professional growth, financial independence, and personal satisfaction that were transforming not just my own life, but Emma's opportunities and our family's long-term prospects. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't revenge or anger, but strategic transformation that renders the betrayer irrelevant to your success. Kevin's affair had hurt our family and ended our marriage, but it had also connected me with opportunities that were creating a better future than anything we could have built together. As I tucked Emma into bed that night and listened to her excited plans for visiting our office the next day to help with decorations for an upcoming client event, I realized that Kevin's greatest betrayal had become the foundation for our greatest success.
His deception had introduced me to Rachel, whose business vision and expansion needs had aligned perfectly with capabilities I'd been developing for years without recognizing their potential value. The partnership would continue to grow and evolve, presenting new challenges and opportunities that would test and expand our professional abilities. But the foundation we'd built was solid, based on honest communication, complementary skills, and genuine respect for each other's contributions to our shared success. The Phoenix skyline glittered against the desert sunset as I stood in the executive conference room of our new headquarters, watching Rachel adjust the presentation display for what would be the most important business meeting of our careers. 18 months had passed since that first awkward encounter in her showroom. 18 months that had transformed two women dealing with Kevin's deception into the most sought-after event planning and design partnership in the Southwest. Tonight's meeting wasn't just another client consultation. Representatives from Marriott International were flying in from corporate headquarters to discuss a comprehensive service contract that would cover event coordination and interior design for their entire Western region expansion. The contract was worth more than either Rachel or I had ever imagined possible when we'd first started working together, representing validation that our partnership had evolved far beyond the circumstances of its unusual beginning. Emma sat at the smaller conference table, carefully arranging colored pencils while working on homework that her teacher had agreed to let her complete during this special visit to my office. At 10 years old, she'd become something of a mascot for our staff, charming clients and vendors with her artistic talents and precocious understanding of business concepts she'd absorbed from countless conversations about projects and partnerships. Her presence in the office had become increasingly common as our success allowed for flexibility that my previous administrative job had never offered. Emma could complete her schoolwork in our client lounge when after-school care wasn't available, occasionally contributing drawings that clients found delightful enough to request as custom artwork for their events or spaces. The transformation of our family's circumstances extended far beyond financial improvement, though the economic changes had been dramatic enough to reshape every aspect of our daily lives. We'd moved from our cramped apartment to a spacious townhouse with a dedicated art studio for Emma and a home office where I could manage administrative tasks during evening hours without disrupting family time. Emma's artistic abilities had flourished in our new environment, supported by private lessons and advanced classes that were now easily affordable rather than carefully budgeted luxury. Her work had developed sophistication that impressed her teachers and occasionally caught the attention of clients who commissioned pieces for their homes or offices. The custody arrangement with Kevin had evolved into something that worked reasonably well for everyone involved, though his role in our lives had diminished scheduled visits and birthday celebrations rather than daily presence or significant influence over major decisions. His employment with the small marketing firm had provided enough stability for consistent child support payments while keeping him occupied with legitimate professional responsibility. Kevin's attempts to rebuild his life had been moderately successful, though he'd never regained the confidence or grandiose ambitions that had characterized his earlier deception. His relationship with Emma remained affectionate but limited, and he'd shown no inclination to pursue romantic relationships that might complicate the careful balance we'd established around co-parenting responsibility. The contrast between Kevin's diminished circumstances and my expanding opportunities had been stark enough to make even Emma aware of the dramatic shifts in our family dynamic. She'd never expressed resentment about her father's reduced presence, perhaps because Kevin's reliability had improved even as his influence decreased, making their time together more predictable and satisfying than his previous pattern of broken promises and disappointed expectations. Rachel entered the conference room carrying the portfolio of recent projects that would anchor our presentation to the Marriott executives, her expression carrying the focused energy that always preceded important client meetings. Her business acumen had impressed me consistently throughout our partnership, but her ability to remain composed under pressure while managing multiple complex negotiations had been particularly valuable as our contracts became larger and more sophisticated. The relationship between us had evolved beyond professional collaboration into genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared vision for continued growth. The awkward origins of our partnership, rooted in Kevin's deception and our initial deception of each other, had been transformed into a foundation story that demonstrated our ability to navigate complex personal situations while maintaining focus on business objectives. Our staff had grown to include 12 full-time employees and a network of preferred contractors who understood our standards and could be relied upon for consistent quality across multiple simultaneous projects. The expansion had required careful management to maintain the personalized service that distinguished our firm from larger competitors while building systems that could handle increased volume without sacrificing attention to detail. Sarah, Rachel's original assistant, had been promoted to project manager, and was now overseeing 3 junior coordinators whose responsibilities included everything from vendor research to client communication. Her growth within our organization exemplified the opportunities we'd created, not just for ourselves, but for other women seeking advancement in the events and design industry. The office space we'd leased in a prestigious Scottsdale business complex reflected our evolution from startup partnership to established regional player. The showroom displayed Rachel's most impressive design work alongside documentation of events we'd coordinated, creating an environment that communicated both creative vision and operational competence to potential clients. Emma looked up from her homework as the Marriott representatives arrived, offering the kind of polite greeting she'd perfected through exposure to countless client meetings. Her confidence in professional settings had developed naturally as she'd observed successful business interactions, absorbing lessons about communication and relationship management that would serve her well regardless of her eventual career choices. The presentation we'd prepared for Marriott was comprehensive, covering everything from our design philosophy to project management systems, financial structures to timeline guarantee. The contract they were considering would require coordination across multiple states and dozens of properties, demanding operational sophistication that few firms could provide while maintaining the creative excellence that had built our reputation. Rachel began the presentation with an overview of our design approach, explaining how we'd developed signature aesthetics that could be adapted to different regions and property types, while maintaining brand consistency across diverse projects. Her portfolio included hotels, corporate retreats, and special event spaces that demonstrated our ability to work within various budgets and timeline constraints. My portion of the presentation focused on operational capabilities including staff qualifications, vendor networks, and project management systems that enabled us to coordinate multiple simultaneous projects without compromising quality or deadline commitment. The systems we'd developed had been tested through 18 months of increasingly complex assignments, proving their effectiveness across various event types and client requirements. The Marriott executives asked sophisticated questions about scalability, quality control, and financial structures that demonstrated their serious interest in our capability. Their inquiries covered everything from insurance requirements to subcontractor management, staff training protocols to emergency contingency planning. Rachel and I had anticipated most of their concerns and prepared detailed responses that showed we'd thought carefully about the challenges of managing such an extensive contract. Our answers were supported by documentation from previous large-scale projects and testimonials from clients who could verify our ability to deliver consistent results under pressure. The financial terms we'd proposed were aggressive but realistic, reflecting both the value we could provide and the investment required to service such an extensive contract. The revenue projections supported hiring additional staff, expanding our vendor network, and potentially opening satellite offices in other Western markets where Marriott properties would require our service. During the break between presentation segments, Emma quietly showed one of the Marriott executives a drawing she'd created, depicting elegant hotel ballrooms filled with happy guests, her artistic interpretation of the events we might coordinate for their property. The executive was charmed enough to ask if she might consider creating artwork for actual hotel spaces, a suggestion that delighted Emma and impressed the other representatives. The meeting concluded with expressions of serious interest from the Marriott team and commitments to provide detailed follow-up information within 2 weeks. While no final decisions were announced, the tone of their questions and comments suggested genuine enthusiasm for the partnership possibilities we'd presented. As the executives departed and our staff began cleaning up presentation materials, Rachel and I found ourselves alone in the conference room with Emma, who was packing her art supplies with obvious satisfaction about the evening's event. The moment felt significant, representing not just a successful business presentation, but a milestone in the journey that had brought us to this point. Emma asked if the hotel people would really want her drawings for their buildings, her excitement about the possibility evident in her animated questions about how artwork was selected and displayed in professional settings. Her artistic ambitions had grown along with our business success, and she'd begun expressing interest in studying design and possibly joining our firm when she was old. The conversation with Emma about her future aspirations reminded me of how dramatically our circumstances had changed since Kevin's affair had first disrupted our family's stability. What had initially seemed like a crisis that threatened our financial security and emotional well-being had become the catalyst for opportunities that were reshaping our entire approach to life and career plan. The following weeks brought confirmation that the Marriott contract would move forward, along with negotiations about specific terms and implementation timelines that would occupy much of our attention for the remainder of the year. The contract would require expanding our operations significantly while maintaining the quality standards that had earned their interest in the first place. Rachel and I spent countless hours discussing staffing needs, office space requirements, and operational changes necessary to service such an extensive client relationship. The growth opportunities were exciting but also daunting, requiring careful planning to ensure that rapid expansion didn't compromise the personalized service that had distinguished our firm from larger competitors. The financial implications extended far beyond increased revenue to include investment requirements for additional equipment, expanded office space, and staff training programs that would prepare our team for the complexity of multi-state project coordination. The contract would transform our partnership from a successful regional operation into a significant player in the national events and design industry. Emma's reaction to our business expansion was purely positive, excited by the possibility of visiting different cities and seeing the hotels where we'd be working. Her questions about travel and project coordination revealed sophisticated understanding of business concepts that impressed teachers and friends' parents who encountered her during school events and social gatherings. The success of our partnership had become something of a local business legend, featured in magazine articles and conference presentations about innovative approaches to professional collaboration. The story of how Kevin's affair had inadvertently connected two women who'd built something remarkable together resonated with audiences interested in transformation and resilience narrative. Rachel and I were occasionally invited to speak at business events about partnership development, though we always focused on professional aspects of our collaboration rather than the personal circumstances that had brought us together. The awkward origins of our relationship had become less significant, as our business success validated the partnership's foundation in complementary skills and shared vision. 6 months after signing the Marriott contract, our firm was managing projects in 12 states, while maintaining headquarters operations in Phoenix that supported satellite teams across the Western region. The growth had been managed carefully to preserve quality standards while building systems that could handle increased volume and geographic distribution. Emma had adapted to my increased travel schedule with remarkable maturity, spending some evenings with Kevin when business trips required overnight absence while maintaining her academic performance and artistic pursuits. Her resilience and flexibility had been crucial factors in my ability to pursue expansion opportunities without compromising family responsibility. The financial success of our partnership had created opportunities for Emma that extended far beyond immediate needs to include college savings, travel experiences, and artistic education that would support whatever career aspirations she eventually developed. Her confidence and ambition had grown along with our family's improved circumstances, and she spoke about future possibilities with optimism that reflected her understanding of how hard work and strategic planning could create positive change. Kevin's presence in our lives had stabilized into predictable patterns that worked reasonably well for everyone involved, though his influence over major decisions had diminished to nearly nothing, as my independence and success had grown. His relationship with Emma remained important to both of them, but it no longer required compromise or accommodation from me beyond basic scheduling coordination. The contrast between my current circumstances and the financial stress that had characterized our marriage was stark enough to make me occasionally reflect on the path that had brought me to this point. Kevin's deception had been painful and disruptive, but it had also been the beginning of the most rewarding period of my professional life. 2 years after our first meeting in Rachel's showroom, she and I were featured on the cover of Southwest Business magazine as Partners of the Year, recognizing both our business success and our innovative approach to professional collaboration. The article highlighted our rapid growth and expansion while noting the unique partnership model that had enabled two women to build something neither could have achieved independently. Reading the magazine article while sitting in our executive conference room, surrounded by project portfolios and expansion plans for the coming year, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had begun with Kevin's affair and evolved into the most significant professional achievement of my life. The partnership with Rachel had demonstrated that betrayal and disappointment could become catalysts for positive change when approached with strategic thinking and determination to build something better than what had been lost. Kevin's deception had connected me with opportunities that wouldn't have been available otherwise, transforming what should have been purely destructive into the foundation for remarkable success. Emma joined me in the conference room after finishing her homework in the client lounge, settling into her favorite chair, while describing plans for an art project inspired by hotel designs she'd seen during our recent business trip to Colorado. Her enthusiasm for creative work had been encouraged and supported by our improved circumstances, and her artistic abilities continued developing in ways that suggested genuine talent and potential for professional success. As I listened to Emma's excited descriptions of color schemes and architectural details that had captured her imagination, I felt profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought us to this point. Kevin's affair had hurt our family and ended our marriage, but it had also opened doors to professional growth, financial independence, and personal satisfaction that were transforming not just my own life, but Emma's opportunities and our family's long-term prospects. The business partnership with Rachel continued to exceed our projections, with new contracts and expansion opportunities emerging regularly as our reputation for excellence and innovation spread throughout the Western region and beyond. We'd established ourselves as leaders in integrated event planning and design services, setting standards that competitors struggled to match. Looking toward the future, I saw possibilities that extended far beyond anything I'd imagined during those difficult weeks, when Kevin's deception was first being revealed. The partnership had created a platform for continued growth that could establish us as national leaders in the events industry while providing financial security and professional satisfaction that would sustain us for decades to come. That evening, as Emma and I reviewed photos from recent projects while planning her upcoming 12th birthday celebration, I realized that Kevin's greatest betrayal had become the foundation for our greatest success. His affair had introduced me to Rachel, whose business vision and expansion needs had aligned perfectly with capabilities I'd been developing for years without recognizing their potential value. The partnership would continue to grow and evolve, presenting new challenges and opportunities that would test and expand our professional abilities, while providing stability and growth that could support whatever aspirations Emma developed as she matured. We built something substantial and sustainable that would benefit not just our immediate family but the employees and clients, whose lives were touched by our work. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't revenge or anger, but strategic transformation that renders the betrayer irrelevant to your success, while creating something better than what existed before. Kevin's deception had ended our marriage, but it had also begun the most rewarding chapter of my professional life, proving that unexpected opportunities can emerge from even the most painful situations, when approached with vision, determination, and willingness to take calculated risks. As I tucked Emma into bed that night in our beautiful townhouse, listening to her plans for artistic projects and business ideas that reflected her growing understanding of entrepreneurship and creative collaboration, I felt complete satisfaction with the path we'd traveled together. The journey had been difficult and uncertain at times, but it had led us to a place of security, success, and optimism about the future that exceeded anything I'd thought possible when Kevin's lies were first exposed. The partnership with Rachel had proven that professional relationships built on honesty, mutual respect, and complementary skills could create opportunities that transformed lives in ways that went far beyond financial success. We demonstrated that women could support each other through difficult transitions while building something remarkable together, turning personal crisis into professional triumph through strategic thinking and unwavering commitment to excellence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.